Every day, Maine's Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife's biologists, educators, game wardens, and other staff members report to some widespread and wild locations spanning Maine's fields, forests, lakes and labs, and trucks, boats, on snowmobiles, and ATVs. I'm Katie Yates, and this is the final episode for Season 1 of Fishin' Game Changers. On a bright and surprisingly warm day in early March, I meet up with Jen Vachon, our Black Bear and Canada Lynx biologist, and 3 members of the Bear Crew, Ethan, Matt, and Nick. This time of year, the Bear Crew is making den visits to monitor the health of female black bears and their newborn cubs. For this visit, Jen is leading a group of Bowdoin College biology students who will observe this practice as part of their coursework. In a slushy parking lot, Jen gives the students a rundown of what we'll be doing at the den site and why.
That one would be different. So when we select the study areas, we're trying to represent different things. We're looking at differences in maybe bear densities, hunting pressure, and forested habitat. So this study area, the Bradford study area, is kind of in between a forest farm. And so as you drove by on our drive out here, we went through some pretty good farm fields as well as the esker and the gravel pits. But then as you move a little bit to the north, and I think we'll be heading into that, we'll get into some forest land that's managed for forest.
The study area is where the crew regularly collars female bears. According to Jen, it was selected due to the surrounding environment. Jen also explains why they only put radio collars on female bears.
From a population standpoint, your females are what are most important because they're going to be the ones that are breeding and producing offspring. And so when we're looking at population growth, by radio collaring the females, we get a better understanding for how the population is doing because we can look at age of first reproduction, average litter size, cub survival. And so that's why we put all of our money and focus on the females.
And why study the bear populations at all?
Social carrying capacity. So we want to make sure our bear population is healthy and doesn't go beyond the resources of its habitat. And then we also want to keep them in balance with the people. Our goals are to maintain our bear population at biological carrying capacity and social carrying capacity. So we want to keep them healthy at the level that their habitat can sustain and not get to the point where there's too many conflicts and negative interactions between bears and people. And so,
to access the general location of the bear's den, the Bear Crew leads us deep into the woods on snowmobiles until the density of the forest and our proximity to the snoozing female bear forces us to hike on foot. Did I mention this was my first time on a snowmobile?
So we'll have somebody post hole it out to that first sled and get on there. Somebody get on with Matt, somebody get on with Ethan, and then the 2 of us will jump our sleds over, and then 2 people can get on the back with us.
For several miles, we trudge and crash through knee-deep, crusty but melting snow. The female we're tracking is wearing a radio collar that emits a signal that allows the crew to locate her with special equipment. Matt listens with the headphones connected to a telemetry receiver. The signal emitted from the bear's collar gets louder if we're headed in the right direction. When we're close, the Bear Crew parks the troop of college students in a little clearing, and with whispers and hand signals, motions for me to follow them toward the den. As I walk closer, I try my best to be as quiet as possible, but it's really hard when the snow is so loud. Beneath a fallen tree fortified with pine branches, a mother bear sleeps while her cubs call out. That is the sound of the bears inside the den with their mother. The crew works quickly and quietly, surrounding the den. Using a long pole equipped with a tranquilizer at the end, the sow bear is poked in the shoulder region. This is a very intense moment while we wait for the tranquilizer to work. A squirrel in a branch chatters at us while we wait. And we wait. And we wait. Finally, she drifts off to sleep. The fun really begins when the mother is taken from the den and the cubs are wrapped in coats to keep them warm while the crew works to take the samples they need. This gives the curious Bowdoin College students an opportunity to ask Jen questions about the process and the science. For photos of a bear den visit and little cubs, visit mefishwildlife.com/changers.
So you see the thing wrapped in orange?
Yeah.
So there's a needle just and a syringe on the end. And so you just reach in and you go for a muscle mass. Mm-hmm. So like the shoulder. We usually don't try for the rump because that's where all the fat is on a bear. And so then you're going to be, the drug's not going to take effect in the fat. So we want to put it into the muscle.
How many times has this bear been?
This is a 5-year-old.
How long have you been tracking her for?
So I'm not sure if we tracked her since she was a cub. Nick, do you know? Have we tracked? Is she a known-age bear?
Yes. Yep.
And did we,
she's KA 15.
and did we handle her as a cub?
Must have, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So we've handled her since she was a cub. Then we're going to mark each cub with a uniquely numbered ear tag in each ear. And so when we go back to the den next year, if there are only 2 yearlings in the den, we'll know if it was which cub survived, and if they're all 3 males or all 3 females.
With the radio collar replaced, weight and hair samples taken, and the mother and her cubs carefully placed back into the den, the group of us plot out a now moonlit walk through the forest back to the snowmobiles. After the den visit, I have a chance to sit down with Jen and chat about why the work she does for black bears is so meaningful. What your position is and what you do.
Yep. So I'm the state black bear and lynx biologist. I work out of our Bangor office. And so I oversee both our black bear program and our lynx program. And so for the bear program, that involves monitoring the bear population, knowing how well the population is doing in the state, looking at harvest, and working on policy issues. And so in order to conserve wildlife, you need to know how they're doing and what any of the threats are, and then adjust for those threats. With the non-game species.
By non-game species, Jen is referring to species that are not hunted in our state. And in her case, that means Canada lynx.
We're not managing the harvest side of things, but we're still monitoring the population and trying to assess what may be limiting their numbers. And on the game side of things, with the game species, again, we're monitoring the population status. And then one thing that we can have control over is harvest. And so if we're over harvesting or under harvesting, we can make adjustments.
So what are some ways that you track that for bear?
Yep, so there's a couple different parameters we use. So one of the easiest tools available to us is from the harvest. And so every bear hunter is required to purchase a permit in order to hunt a black bear, so we know how many people are hunting. And then if they're successful in harvesting a black bear, they're required to register that, so we know how many bears are being removed every year. That's information that we use to understand how the population is doing.
There are 35,000 black bears in Maine. These den visits provide Jen with keen insight into the health of the bear populations for generations.
But then we also go out and monitor black bears. And so we have dens that we visit. So we have about 90 females that are equipped with radio collars across the state. And we go
In addition to checking the bear's general wellness, they replace radio collars on existing bears in the study group and add more radio collared bears to the study.
And we go to their dens each winter and determine what percentage of those females have offspring.
And that's what we went out and did. We went out and looked at new cubs that...
Right. So, yeah, bear cubs are born in January. And so, so the den trip that you went on, we basically went out there to visit the dens of females that we anticipated were going to give birth to cubs. And so the purpose of that den visit was to identify how many females actually gave birth to cubs, what was the average litter size, did they give birth to 1 cub, 2 cubs, 3 or 4, and then that information is important because next year we'll go back to that same female and see how many of her cubs survived. And then those cubs will now be a year old, and in the spring they'll go out on their own and enter the population as new bears. So we're interested in the condition of both the adult female that we visited at the den site, but also the condition of either her cubs, if she gave birth this year, or her yearlings from the previous year. One thing that we see that varies from year to year, most notably, is yearling weights. So this year was an extremely good natural food year. So our berry crops, our nut crops, they were all very abundant. So black bears were really healthy. And so we were seeing very healthy yearlings in the winter den. So the other purpose of the den visit is so that we can maintain that sample of bears. We replace the radio collar on the adult female. There's only so much battery life with each radio collar. But then we also add additional bears to the study by going to dens. So every female yearling that is with the adult female gets a radio collar, and now she'll become part of the study.
And the sow that we looked at in the den, you guys also looked at when she was a cub, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Right. And so essentially, if we handle a female as a cub in the den, we can follow her throughout her life and see how old is she when she first produces a litter, how many litters does she give birth to, how many of those cubs make it to independence. And so we can follow a bear through her life, and then when she dies, how does she die? And at what age does she die? And that information is important for us to understand how the population is changing over time.
Maine's bear population is currently being managed in order to keep it healthy without negative impacts to the ecosystem or resulting in human-wildlife conflict. What are the negative aspects of that?
So when we look at managing Maine's bear population, there are 2 different facets that we're trying to accomplish. One is we want to maintain a healthy, abundant resource. So we want our bears to be in good condition, living within what their habitat can support. But at the same time, we also recognize that we can't have so many bears that they're causing conflicts. And
conflicts with people?
With people, right. So having bears show up in people's backyards in the spring is often really alarming for people if they're out in their yard and a bear wanders through to get at their bird feeder or to get at their grills. So those are some of the things that we're trying to avoid as folks being concerned about living in proximity to bears and having negative encounters with black bears. Part of it is just maintaining our population at a level where we limit those interactions, but also working to educate people on what they can do, to prevent bears from showing up in the backyard in the first place.
Like taking bird feeders in and...
Yeah, and this podcast is a perfect time of year right now because we're coming into spring. It's going to be an early spring. And so bears, when they're in their winter den, they're living off of their food resources or their fat reserves from the previous year. So when they come out of the den in April, there's not a lot of food out there yet. Things haven't greened up. And so that's when bears show up in people's backyard. They're willing to take that risk to leave, the comfort or security of the woods to go into someone's backyard because they need food. And so in an early spring, like I anticipate we're going to have this year, we're going to start hearing about bears in people's backyards. So this is the time of year where we often recommend to people, start bringing in your bird feeders, rake up any seed that's left on the ground, because a lot of times people bring in bird seeds or their bird feeders, but there's still a lot of seed on the ground. And so while I brought in my bird feeders, why are bears still showing up? And if they clean up that bird seed and their neighbors do the same, hopefully there won't be bears showing up in their backyard.
How many bears are there in Maine?
Yep, so our bear population is one of the largest in the lower 48. We have about 35,000 black bears in Maine. That's a lot of bears. Currently, we're actually looking at ways to increase hunting opportunity because we're not meeting our harvest objectives. But that's by going to these dens and looking at the females and how productive they are being helps us understand how many bears we need to remove each year from the population.
Jen's job is very cool. I ask her how it is that she ended up with a job that sometimes involves holding tiny bear cubs. You get to go out and see baby bears on a regular basis, and what got you to this point?
Well, I grew up here in Maine, and I always had a love for the outdoors and a love for wildlife and animals in general. And so, like most young people, you start thinking about, what am I going to do when I graduate from high school? What kind of career opportunities are out there for me? And, you know, it's hard, I think. I don't think it's well known, this field, the field of wildlife management. And so I think it can be often hard for people to realize what opportunities are out there. I think most people are more aware of game wardens and the role that game wardens play. Wildlife biologists, fishery biologists, we kind of go somewhere under the radar, and people aren't even aware those positions exist. I was fortunate that when I was a young girl that I read a book about a wildlife biologist, and so that's when I realized, oh, there's something that I could actually do and really enjoy. And then I guess for me, probably the turning point was, you know, going to college and starting in that profession.
When Jen was a freshman at the University of Maine, she was fortunate enough to get some field experience.
And for me, I was fortunate to figure out that, yeah, you know, I read about a black bear biologist when I was a teenager and said, well, that might be something that I'd be interested in. And I had the opportunity to work with black bears and a variety of other wildlife and said, yeah, this is right for me.
Yeah. What do you love most about the work that you do?
Everybody asks that, and it's so hard for me.
That's always the hardest question.
I think it is.
Yeah.
And because I think it's hard to pinpoint what's the most rewarding when, in general, your job is rewarding on so many different facets. You know, my go-to is usually thinking about all the different people that I've met. So in this career, particularly in the beginning of your career, you have the opportunity to work truly in the field and be a wildlife technician and work with a lot of different species. And that can take you all over the country, interacting with different people and different forests and different ecosystems, and realizing that we all may come from different backgrounds, but there's something so similar, and what we love about the outdoors and why we've become wildlife professionals, that even though we have diverse backgrounds, we're so similar. Mm-hmm. And so you develop these friendships and relationships with your coworkers, and you become a family. And of course, there's always, that satisfaction, I guess, that you get in doing your job well and becoming knowledgeable about the resource and understanding what that species might need, and being able to move actions forward to make sure that conditions remain good. And I've been fortunate for the species that I've worked with that they're doing really well. Being able to maintain that,
mm-hmm.
Through the programs is rewarding.
It's satisfying to see the population do really well and respond to the techniques that you're implementing.
Yes.
So it's neat.
Yes. And I think, a lot of people enter the field of wildlife management or want to be a wildlife biologist because they want to be outside. But at some point, you realize that not all of the work is involved being outside. So going to a bear den visit, that's probably at the highlight of most people's experiences in life, and everybody wants an opportunity to do that. And most envision that's what we do every day. But the information that we're gathering is so important, right? And so we have to actually synthesize that information and then put it into action. So whether it's a management plan or writing and sharing information with decision makers, And so I think that's really rewarding, even though you're not in the woods every day and outside every day, is seeing all the parts come together and move forward to conserving that species.
Yeah. If you're listening on the Apple Podcast app, give us a rating and let us know what you think. To stay up to date on upcoming episodes, make sure you hit subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And follow us on social media. We're the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife on Facebook and ME Fish Wildlife on Instagram. My name is Katie Yates. Thank you for joining me for Season 1 of Fishing Game Changers. Next month, I hang out with some of our game wardens who are on our K9 team.
Good girl! Good girl! Hawaii!